A very good evening, a very good day to those joining from different time zones, and welcome again to the third session of the Essays on the Gita. We take up chapter 3, The Human Disciple, page, well, we have different pages, Essays on the Gita. Um, some people requested that I read the entire chapter, and actually this is a very, very important chapter because the whole Gita is actually, in a sense, uh, summarized within it. And also, it gives an understanding of the background of the Gita, the character of Arjun, his personality, who he is, and his relationship with the divine teacher that we read last time, Sri Krishna. So it's an exceedingly interesting chapter and a very, very beautiful one. Um, So he starts from the last thought, which was he is the secret master of works and sacrifice and the friend of the human peoples. That is the divine teacher, Sri Krishna. Such then is the divine teacher of the Gita, the eternal avatar. Please note the word, the divine teacher of the Gita is the eternal avatar, not just the human avatar or the past avatar or the avatar of the Dwapara age and so on. He is the eternal avatar. Such then is the divine teacher of the Gita, the eternal avatar, the divine who has descended into the human consciousness, the Lord seated within the heart of all beings, he who guides from behind the veil all our thought and action. So, why is he the eternal avatar? Because he is the Lord. Not only has he come into a human consciousness and taken human birth at a particular time in the history of the earth, but also he is seated within the heart of all beings and guides from behind the veil all our thought and action and heart seeking, even as he directs from behind the veil of visible and sensible forms and forces and tendencies, the great universal action of the world, which he has manifested in his own being. So the avatar is, of course, the human representative or the divine representative in a human body. But the eternal avatar is that is consciously guiding the world, guiding each of us within our hearts, and is present, is the divine presence in us. So, such then is the divine teacher of the Gita. The Lord seated within the heart of all beings, he who guides from behind the veil all our thought and action and heart seeking, even as he directs from behind the veil of visible and sensible forms and forces and tendencies, the great universal action of the world, which he has manifested in his own being. All the strife of our upward endeavor and seeking finds its culmination and ceases in a satisfied fulfillment when we can rend the veil and get behind our apparent self to this real self. So all the strife of our upward endeavor and seeking ceases in a satisfied fulfillment when we can rend the veil and get behind our apparent outer self to this real self, can realize our whole being in this true Lord of our being, can give up our personality to and into this one real person, merge our ever dispersed and ever converging mental activities into his plenary life, offer up our errant and struggling will and energies into his vast, luminous, and undivided will, at once renounce and satisfy all our dissipated outward moving desires and emotions of his self-existent bliss. This is the world teacher, of whose eternal knowledge all other highest teaching is, but the various reflection and partial word, this the voice to which the hearing of our soul has to awaken. So, this guiding from behind the veil can be felt in our lives also. We all have this experience time and again when we are intuitively open, when we are inwardly open, that we have instances of the divine guidance from within. That is the voice of the eternal divine teacher, of that Sri Aurobindo here speaks about. And this is the world teacher, of whose eternal knowledge all other highest teaching is but the various reflection. So all other highest teaching, that means all the scriptures, all the teachings, all the religions, all the various uh, wisdoms that we come in touch with are but the various reflections and partial words. This the voice to which the hearing of our soul has to awaken. Beautiful words. But this is what Sri Aurobindo starts third chapter with. Beautiful, a wonderful chapter to introduce the human disciple, Arjuna, the disciple, who receives his initiation on the battlefield, is a counterpart of this conception. He is the type of the struggling human soul who has not yet received the knowledge, but has grown fit to receive it by action in the world, in a close companionship, and an increasing nearness to the higher and divine self in humanity. So, who is Arjuna? What kind of a disciple is he? He's not an ordinary disciple. He is a disciple who, with his aspiring nature, has come close to those of the higher nature, the highest, in that case of Sri Krishna, in his life, and has gained from that, and has grown in his companionship, has benefited from his vibratory presence, and therefore is ready to receive his teaching. Arjuna, the disciple who receives his initiation on the battlefield, is a counterpart of this conception. He is the type of the struggling human soul, so are we all. But, however, what is the difference between Arjuna and the common man, who has not yet received the knowledge, same as everybody, but has grown fit to receive it? How is he grown fit? And that is a very important clue for us. How do we grow fit to receive this divine knowledge? But has grown fit to receive it by action in the world, in a close companionship and an increasing nearness to the higher divine self in humanity. Sangha. So, why do we have study circles? Why do we want to be in the presence of realized souls? Why do we seek the companionship of those of a higher consciousness? For the same reason. And of course, here Arjuna has the companionship of the great avatar. There there is a method of explaining the Gita in which not only this episode, but the whole Mahabharata is turned into an allegory of the inner life and has nothing to do with our outward human life and action, but only with the battles of the souls and the powers that strive within us for possession. That is a view which the general character and the actual language of the epic does not justify, and, if pressed, would turn the straightforward philosophical language of the Gita into a constant, laborious, and somewhat puerile mystification. The language of the Veda and part at least of the Puranas is made plainly symbolic, full of figures and concrete representations of things that lie behind the veil. But the Gita is written in plain terms and professes to solve the great ethical and spiritual difficulties which the life of man raises. And it will not do to go behind the plain language and thought and rest them to the service of our fancy. But there is this much of truth in the view that the setting of the doctrine, though not symbolical, is certainly typical, as indeed the setting of such a discourse as the Gita must necessarily be, if it is to have any relation at all with that which it frames. Arjun, as we have seen, is the representative man of a great world struggle and divinely guided movement of men and nations. In the Gita, he typifies the human soul of action brought face to face through that action in its highest and most violent crisis with the problem of human life and its apparent incompatibility with a spiritual state or even with a purely ethical ideal of perfection. So here he says the Gita is not an allegory. It's not symbolism like the symbolic images and the symbolic language of the Vedas and Upanishads. Instead, the Gita is a very pragmatic problem that is to be solved in battle, in life, in action. And here in the Gita, uh, the Gita typifies the human soul of action brought face to face with the most violent crisis, with the problem of human life and its apparent incompatibility with the spiritual state, or even with the purely ethical ideal of perfection. And that's why the Gita has so much of resonance with us, because this is what each of us constantly has to go through every day of our lives. We have this in battle that is going on with our inner life and the outer world, our inner aspirations and the outer reality. And of course, in times of crisis, we all look for some wisdom and guidance. So Arjuna is the fighter in the chariot, with the divine Krishna as his charioteer. We spoke about why Krishna was was the charioteer and not the driver of the chariot last time. In the Veda also, we have this image, the human soul and the divine riding in one chariot through a great battle to the goal of a high aspiring effort. But there it is a pure figure and symbol. The divine is there Indra, the master of the world of light and immortality, the power of divine knowledge which descends to the aid of the human seeker, battling with the sons of falsehood, darkness, limitation, mortality. The battle with spiritual enemies who bar the way to the higher world of our being. And the goal is that plane of vast being, resplendent with the light of the supreme truth and uplifted to the conscious immortality of the perfected soul, of which Indra is the master. The human soul is Kutsa, he who constantly seeks the seer knowledge, as his name implies, and he is the son of Arjun, or Arjuni, the white one, child of Swetra, the white mother. He is, that is to say, the sattvic or purified and light-filled soul, which is open to the unbroken glories of the divine knowledge. So here Sri Aurobindo is mentioning that even in the uh, Veda, this image is there of the charioteer and the driver of the chariot. with Indra as the master, and and so on. And the human soul is Kutsa, which is Arjun here in the Gita, and so on. But he says, and when the chariot reaches the end of its journey, the own home of Indra, the human Kutsa, has grown into such an exact likeness of his divine companion that he can only be distinguished by Sachi, the wife of Indra, because she is truth conscious. So this is another parallel parable that I mean he's picking up this from the Vedas. Very interesting again. What stands out for me is again this how you grow into the likeness of that whom you're with. You see, if you see in you grow. That's why they say choose your friends wisely. Choose who you want to live with and be with wisely, because whatever you do, you begin to become more and more like them. And of course, some of us have noticed even physical characteristics where husband and wife start looking like brother and sister after a particular age. So these are all ways that happen. This is the way that life is, and this is what's happened here, even in the Vedas. Veda to Indra and the human Kutsa, where the human Kutsa is who's the law, I mean, who has become more and more as an exact likeness of Indra, the divine companion, that he can only be distinguished by Sachi, the wife of Indra, because she is truth conscious. The parable is evidently of the inner life of man. It is a figure of the human growing into the likeness of the eternal divine by the increasing illumination of knowledge. But the Gita starts from action, and Arjuna is the man of action and not of knowledge. Very, very important. The Gita starts from action, and Arjuna is the man of action and not of knowledge, the fighter, never the seer or the thinker. So, as you know, the vital being, the vital part in us, the is extremely dominant in human nature, and it tends to prefer action over rajas over tamas. And the rajasic element in each of us is rather high. And slowly over time, it becomes more and more balanced to the other. So the Arjuna is a typical man of action of the rajasic type. So, but with a sattvic nature. The sattvic nature has come because of his love for Sri Krishna, and the divine openness to the divine has come due to that also. From the beginning of the Gita, this characteristic temperament of the disciple is clearly indicated, and it is maintained throughout. It becomes first evident in the manner in which he is awakened to the sense of what he is doing, the great slaughter of which he is to be the chief instrument, in the thoughts which immediately rise in him, in the standpoint and the psychological motives which make him recoil from the whole terrible catastrophe. They are not the thoughts, the standpoint, the motives of a philosophical or even of a deeply reflective mind or a spiritual temperament confronted with the same or a similar problem. They are those, as we might say, of the practical or the pragmatic man. So, what are they instead? They are these are not the thoughts of a reflective or contemplative or philosophical man in Arjun. They are what we might say is of a practical or the pragmatic man, the emotional man, the sensational man, the moral and intelligent human being, not habituated to profound and original reflection or any sounding of the depths, accustomed rather to high but fixed standards of thought and action, and a confident treading through all the vicissitudes and difficulties, who now finds all his standards failing him and all the basis of his knowledge in himself and his life shorn away from under him at a single stroke. That is the nature of the crisis which he undergoes. So, what is the nature of the crisis he undergoes, Arjun? Is the crisis of a man of a pragmatic, emotional, sensational, moral, intelligent man who is not accustomed to deep reflection, but suddenly finds the everything has been as though the carpet has been taken off under his feet. He's treading through difficulties, vicissitudes, and now finds all his standards failing him. Whatever moral standards, whatever ethical behavior, whatever ethical, um, uh, whatever his dharma, that concepts that he had grown up with and was educated in, suddenly failed him in front of this terrible decision to wage war against his entire family, except for his brothers who were on his side. But this, where he knew that there would be a mass scale murder and destruction. So, what does he do? That is the nature of the crisis which he undergoes. Arjuna is, in the language of the Gita, the man subject to the action of the three gunas, or modes of the nature force, and habituated to move unquestioningly in that field, like the generality of men. So here is why we can all identify ourselves with the human disciple Arjun, because he is a man subject to the action of the three gunas. What are the three gunas? Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Like we are. We fluctuate from one into the other, or, or in between a lot of them. So he is habituated to them, and he is habituated to move unquestioningly in that field, like the generality of men. He justifies his name only in being so far pure and sattvic as to be governed by high and clear principles and impulses, and habitually control his lower nature by the noblest law which he knows. So that is how he justifies his name, that he does have this incredible moral, ethical control over his lower nature, and lives by high principles. He is not of a violent, asuric disposition, like who in the Mahabharata? Give me another name. Oh, have you unmuted them? Anuradha, you can unmute them, please. He is not of a violent, asuric disposition, not the slave of his passions, but has been trained to a high calm and self-control. Has been trained, mind you, to a high calm. Now, this high calm is samatha. This high calm is a very important concept and a very important attribute throughout the Gita. In fact, verses and verses on samatha, equality, equanimity are there. So he is not of a violent asuric disposition, not the slave of his passions, but has been trained to a high calm and self-control, to an swerving performance of his duties, and firm obedience to the best principles of the time and society in which he has lived, and the religion and ethics to which he has been brought up. So, who is of a violent asuric disposition and a slave of his passions in the Gita? Give me a name, Shibani. Unmute yourself. Huh?
Bhim and
Duryodhana?
Duryodhan, these are two very critical, and they were opposite to each other throughout the war because of the violent nature of their disposition.
Okay, so you're even mentioning him. That's interesting. Slaves to their passions. Of course, the Duryodhana is more well known, but Bhim, she's also mentioning Bhim. No, there is a part of him that was completely out of control. Okay, but he was not asuric in his nature so much as Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra and some of these other brothers were. Oh, he was. When you lose your sense of right and wrong, would you call Dhritarashtra Asurik? You
He
all know the
is
Gita.
the real epitome of ignorance, totally blind,
Ignorance.
completely. So because of
By
his
love,
ignorance,
attachment.
and because
No,
of
but
his
why?
ignorance,
Ignorance is not there. It's attachment to his
attachment.
love and attachment to his son, which overrides all his principles.
And it was because of this that the Asuric nature of Duryodhan could flourish and thrive because of the blindness of Dhritarashtra.
Okay. Anyway, we leave you all to decide who's what. He is not of an so Arjun certainly is not of an violent Asuric disposition, not the slave of his passions, and so on. But he lives according to the best principles of the time and society in which he has lived, and the religions and ethics to which he has been brought up. He is egoistic like other men, but with the purer or sattvic egoism. So his egoism is of the purer sattvic nature, which regards the moral law and society and the claims of others, and not only or predominantly his own interests, desires, and passions. So that is the difference of his between his egoism and others. He had he has lived and guided himself by the Shastra, the moral and social code, the thought which preoccupies him, the standard which he obeys is the dharma, that collective Indian conception of the religious, social, and moral rule of conduct, and especially the rule of the station and function to which he belongs. He, the Kshatriya, the high minded, self governed, chivalrous prince and warrior, and leader of Aryan men, following always this rule, conscious of virtue and right dealing, he has traveled so far and finds suddenly that it has led him to become the protagonist of a terrific and unparalleled slaughter, monstrous civil war involving all the cultured Aryan nations, which must lead to the complete destruction of the flower of their manhood and threatens their ordered civilization with chaos and collapse. It is typical again of the pragmatic man that it is through his sensations that he awakens to the meaning of his action. So it's very interesting. Again, Sri Aurobindo keeps. Now, this is so important because when we start reading the shlokas later, this is what is going to be the guiding, give us an idea of why he is behaving and saying the things he is, because he is acting from his sensations, from the pragmatism of a man of action. He is speaking as a Kshatriya and is governed by the highest rule of conduct and dharma of a Kshatriya. And that is why he is in such a lot of pain and dilemma of what to do. And the vital is what? The sensation. So he has, it is typical again of the pragmatic that it is through his sensations that he awakens to the meaning of his action. What are the sensations here? When he comes to the battlefield, till then it's all very good. When he stands there and sees who he has to fight with and what is the magnitude of the massacre that is going to take place. That is when Arjun's conscience and he completely becomes, and that is why the Gita's teaching happens on the battlefield and not in a drawing room or in a ashram or a hermitage. So he has asked his friend and charioteer to place him between the two armies, not with any profounder idea, but with the proud intention of viewing and looking in the face these myriads of the champions of unrighteousness, whom he has to meet and conquer and slay in the holiday of fight, so that the right may prevail. So you remember in the Gita, he asked Shri Krishna, take me to the, and Shri Krishna takes him right to the center, and he is proudly standing there, wanting to see who he has to kill and slay. in this holiday of fight, so that the right may prevail. It is as he gazes that the revelation of the meaning of a civil and domestic war comes home to him. A war in which not only men of the same race, the same nation, the same clan, but those of the same family and household stand upon opposite sides, all whom the social man holds most dear and sacred, he must meet as enemies and slay. The worshipped teacher and preceptor. Who is that? Dronacharya. The old friend, comrade, and companion in arms, grandsires, Bhishma Pitama, uncles, those who stood in the relation to him of father, of son, of grandson, connections by blood and connections by marriage, all these social ties have to be cut asunder by the sword. It is not that he did not know these things before, but he has never realized it all. Obsessed by his claims and wrongs and by the principles of his life, the struggle for the right, the duty of the Kshatriya to protect justice and the law and fight and beat down injustice and lawless violence. He has neither thought it out deeply nor felt it in his heart and at the core of his life. And now it is shown to his vision by the divine charioteer. And now it is shown to his vision by the divine charioteer, placed sensationally before his eyes, and comes home to him like a blow delivered at the very center of his sensational, vital, and emotional being. The first result is a violent, sensational, and physical crisis, which produces a disgust of the action and its material objects and of life itself. He rejects the vital aim pursued by egoistic humanity in its action, happiness and enjoyment. He rejects the vital aim of the Kshatriya, victory and rule and power and the government of people. What, after all, is this fight for justice when reduced to its practical terms? But just this, a fight for the interests of himself, his brothers, and his party, for possession and enjoyment and rule. So he says, what after all is this fight for justice? When it is reduced to its practical terms, it is a fight for the interests of himself, for his brothers, for his party, for possession and enjoyment and rule. But at such a cost of these things are, but they are of no, but at such a cost, these things are not worth having, for they are of no value in themselves, but only as a means to the right maintenance of social and national life. And it is these very aims that, in the person of his kin and his race, he is about to destroy. And then comes the cry of the emotions. These are they for whose sake life and happiness are desired, our own people. Who would consent to slay these for the sake of all the earth, or even for the kingdom of the three worlds? What pleasure can there be in life? What happiness? What satisfaction in oneself after such a deed? These are the questions. These are the dilemmas that go through Arjun's mind as he's standing in the battlefield and watching this and saying, what is the use? All this, when this is going to be the result, why am I doing this? And don't forget, he's a upright, principled Kshatriya, the highest and noblest type. So obviously, he can understand that what is the consequence of this action going to bring? So they have no value in themselves, right? Who would consent to slay these for the sake of all the earth, all one's own people, or even for the kingdom of three worlds? What pleasure can there be in life? What happiness? What satisfaction in oneself after such a deed? The whole thing is a dreadful sin. For now, the moral sense awakens to justify the revolt of the sensations and emotions. It is a sin. So once the revolt of Arjuna's own sensations, there was a revolt of his own sensational and emotional being on seeing in front of him his own family, his own clan, his own people. And the moral sense then came to justify this emotional revolt. For now, the moral sense awakens to justify the revolt of the sensations and the emotions. It is a sin. There is no right nor justice in mutual slaughter. Especially are those who are to be slain, the natural objects of reverence and of love, those without whom one would not care to live. And to violate these sacred feelings can be no virtue, can be nothing but a heinous crime. Granted that the offense, the aggression, the first sin, the crimes of greed and selfish passion, which have brought things to such a pass, came from the other side. Yet, armed resistance to wrong under such circumstances would be itself a sin and a crime worse than theirs, because they are blinded by passion and unconscious of guilt. While on this side, Arjun's side, it would be with a clear sense of guilt that the sin would be committed. And for what? For the maintenance of family morality, of the social law, and the law of the nation. These are the very standards that will be destroyed by the civil war. And what Arjun is thinking is true. It will be the whole clan was destroyed. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with his thought process. He's correct in the way that he's perceiving things. But he is he is perceiving things from his moral, dharmic view. And that is where the dharma that Sri Krishna teaches in the Gita is of a different order that we will come to. So these are the very standards that will be destroyed by this civil war. The family itself will be brought to the point of annihilation, corruption of morals, and loss of the purity of race will be engendered. The eternal laws of the race and moral law of the family will be destroyed. Ruin of the race, the collapse of its high traditions, ethical degradation, and hell for the authors of such a crime. These are the only practical results possible of this monstrous civil strife. Therefore, cries Arjun, casting down the divine bow, an inexhaustible quiver given to him by the gods for that tremendous hour. It is more for my welfare that the sons of Dhritarashtra, armed, should slay me unarmed and unresisting. I will not fight. And that is when he puts it down. And he said, I will not fight. It is better that they slay me, the sons of Dhritarashtra die, than all of them that I kill them. The character of this inner crisis is therefore not the questioning of the thinker. It is not a recoil from the appearances of life and a turning of the eye inward in search of the truth of things, the real meaning of his existence and a solution or an escape from the dark riddle of the world. It is a sensational, emotional, and moral revolt of the man hitherto satisfied with action and its current standards, who finds himself cast by them into a hideous chaos, where they are in violent conflict with each other and with themselves, and there is no moral standing ground left, nothing to lay hold of and walk by, no dharma. So you can see how in this chapter, the human disciple, how whole Gita is being laid out. And what a wonderful exposition and backgrounding of the text is being given. So he says, when he says the character of the crisis that Arjun went through standing in that battlefield is not a recoil from the appearances of life, saying that I will go to sannyas, I will leave this world, I do not, or the questioning of the thinker. Instead, what is it? Or the solution or an escape from the riddle of the world. Instead, it is a sensational, emotional, moral revolt of whom? Of the man otherwise satisfied with action and its current standards, who finds himself in a hideous chaos where, in a violent conflict with each other, and with no moral standing ground left, nothing to lay hold of and walk by, no dharma. So, what has really happened to Arjuna? Standing there is his dharma, the dharma of the age, the dharma of what he was born into, of the Kshatriya, the dharma of his clan, the dharma of everything that he has been brought up with has been, for he stood for, has been at one moment been destroyed, has been annihilated, is gone. So he suddenly finds, like we find, when we are in terrible moral crises, that we have everything that we believe in has been taken away. Now where do we look for the answer? Where do we find the, you know, the right? What kind of action do we take to know what is the right thing to do? That is what has happened to Arjun here. His dharma has been disturbed. What is dharma? There's a note below. Dharma means literally that which one lays hold of and which holds things together. That which dharma, that which one lays hold of and which holds things together, the law, the norm, the rule of nature, action, and life. So, this rule of nature, action, and life has been totally disturbed. And he has suddenly finds that he has nothing to stand by. That is at this moment the Gita begins. So that for the soul of that for the soul of action and the mental being is the worst possible crisis. So if you're a man of action, this is the worst possible crisis when you don't know what to do and what action to take. Fail. So this is the worst possible crisis, failure and overthrow. The revolt itself is the most elemental and simple possible. Sensationally, the elemental feeling of horror, pity, and disgust. Vitally, the loss of attraction and faith in the recognized and familiar objects of action and aims of life. Emotionally, the recoil of the ordinary feelings of social man, affection, reverence, desire for common happiness and satisfaction, from a stern duty outraging them all. Morally, the elementary sense of sin and hell and rejection of blood-stained enjoyments. Practically, the sense that the standards of action have led to a result which destroys the practical aims of action. The whole upshot is that. But the whole upshot is that all-embracing inner bankruptcy, the all-embracing inner bankruptcy which Arjun expresses when he says that his whole conscious being, not the thought alone, but heart and vital desires and all, are utterly bewildered and can find nowhere the dharma, nowhere any valid law of action. For this alone, he takes refuge as a disciple with Sri Krishna. So for this alone, that he has, because he is left with no valid law of action and no dharma, he takes refuge as a disciple in his friend and his and in someone he loves as Sri Krishna. So for this alone he takes refuge as a disciple with Sri Krishna, with Krishna. Give me, he practically asks, that which I have lost. A true law, a clear rule of action, a path by which I can again confidently walk. He does not ask for the secret of life or of the world, the meaning and purpose of it all, but he asks for a dharma, because that is what Arjuna has lost. The most beautiful passage in this chapter. I'm going to now read. Wonderful. And yet, it is precisely the secret for which he does not ask, or at least so much of the knowledge as is necessary to lead him into a higher life, to which the divine. Yet it is precisely the secret for which he does not ask, or at least so much of the knowledge as is necessary to lead him into a higher life, which the divine teacher intends to lead this disciple. For he means him to give up all dharmas except the one broad and vast rule of living consciously in the divine and acting from that consciousness. So the divine teacher, Sri Krishna, intends to lead Arjuna to whatever that which he has not asked, but that to which he will have to go to get the answer to his question on what is the right action I should take. How do I know what to do in this crisis of my life? And that is what he says, to which the divine teacher intends to lead this disciple. But he means him to give up all dharmas except the one broad and vast rule of living consciously in the divine and acting from that consciousness. So, what is the one broad and vast rule of living that Sri Krishna wants Arjun to live by? One, to living consciously in the divine and acting from that divine, that consciousness. Sorry? What is truth of existence? So what is, yes, so to live consciously is to be conscious of the divine presence in you and to be in touch with the divine. Therefore, after testing the completeness of his revolt from the ordinary standards of conduct, he proceeds to tell him much that has to do with the state of the soul, but nothing of any outward rule of action. He must be equal in soul, abandon the desire of the fruits of work, rise above his intellectual notions of sin and virtue, live and act in yoga with a mind in samadhi, firmly fixed, that is to say, in the divine alone. Arjuna is not satisfied. He wishes to know how to change to the state. He wishes to know how the change to the state will affect the outward action of the man, what result it will have on his speech, his movements, his state, what difference it will make in this acting, living human being. Krishna persists merely in enlarging upon the ideas he has already brought forward, on the soul state behind the action, not on the action itself. It is the fixed anchoring of the intelligence in a state of desireless equality that is the one thing needed. Arjuna breaks out impatiently, for here is no rule of conduct such as he sought, but rather, as it seems to him, the negation of all action. And he said, if thou holdest intelligence to be greater than action, why then dost thou appoint me to an action terrible in its nature? So he breaks out at Krishna and says, what are you saying? Yeah, Krishna, if you read, he goes on about uh, all the shlokas about becoming equal, all the tortoise, put your thing, become desireless, put your mind in the. He says, what are you talking about? Why are you saying all this to me when you think that you have to, fix my intelligence in the divine and bring your mind out, upward, get rid of desire, be equal minded, rise above sin and virtue. All of this. Yeah, no, all that. So what are you talking about? So obviously that whole thing is wonderfully put here. If thou holdest, and this is in fact a direct translation of that sloka which we'll read. If thou holdest the intelligence to be greater than action, then why dost thou point me to an action terrible in its nature? Thou bewilderest my understanding with a mingled word. Speak one thing decisively by which I can attain to what is the best. It is always the pragmatic man who has no value for metaphysical thought or for the inner life, except when they help him to his one demand, a dharma, a law of life in the world, or if need be, of leaving the world. But that too is a decisive action which he can understand. To live and act in the world, yet be above it, this is a mingled and confusing word, the sense of which he has no patience to grasp. The rest of Arjuna's questions and utterances proceed from the same temperament and character. When he is told that once the soul state is assured, there need be no apparent change in the action, he must act always by the law of his nature, even if the act itself seem faulty and deficient compared with that of another law than his own, he is troubled. The nature? But what of this sense of sin in the action with which he is preoccupied? Is it not this very nature which drives men, as if by force, and even against their better will, into sin and guilt? His practical intelligence is baffled by Krishna's assertion that it was he who in ancient times revealed to Vivashan this yoga, the sins lost, which he is now again revealing to Arjuna. And by his demand for an explanation, he provokes the famous and oft quoted statement of avatarhood and its mundane purpose. He is again perplexed by the words in which Krishna continues to reconcile action and renunciation of action. He is again perplexed by the words in which Krishna continues to reconcile action and renunciation of action and asks once again for a decisive statement of that which is the best and highest, not this mingled word. When he realizes fully the nature of the yoga which he is bidden to embrace, his pragmatic nature, accustomed to act from mental will and preference and desire, is appalled by its difficulty, and he asks what is the end of the soul which attempts and fails, whether it does not lose both this life of human activity and thought and emotion which it has left behind, and the Brahmic consciousness to which it aspires, and falling from both, perish like a dissolving cloud. So, anyway, so you can read this; it's quite interesting, and these all of this will come back again. When his doubts and perplexities are resolved, and he knows that it is the divine which must be his law. So when his doubts and now towards obviously later on as we proceed into the Gita, and slowly Arjun's doubts and perplexity are resolved, and he knows that it is the divine which must be his law. He aims again and always at such clear and decisive knowledge as will guide him practically to the source and this rule of his future action. How is the divine to be distinguished among the various states of being which constitute our ordinary experience? Then he asks, but how do I know? And it's a very practical, how do I know this is okay? Now I've understood that it is the divine that I have to anchor my life in and my mind in, and I have and that samatha and that that detachment, that whatever it is, the divine um, uh, the voice, and follow that. But he says, then tell me, how is the divine to be distinguished among the various states of being which constitute our ordinary experience? How do I know that this is the divine? What are the great manifestations of its self energy in the world in which he can recognize and realize it by meditation? May he not see even now the divine cosmic form of that which is actually speaking to him and through the veil of the human mind and body. And his last questions demand a clear distinction between renunciation of works and this subtler renunciation he is asked to prefer the actual difference between Purusha and Prakriti, the field and the knower of the field, so important for the practice of desireless action under the drive of the divine will. And finally, a clear statement of the practical operations and results of the three modes of Prakriti which he is bidden to surmount. So, and finally asked, how does he surmount? The practical statement of practical operation. How do I practically surmount the three modes of nature, go beyond Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva? To such a disciple, the teacher of the Gita gives his divine teaching. He seizes him at a moment of his psychological development by egoistic action, when all the mental, moral, emotional values of the ordinary, egoistic, and social life of man have collapsed in a sudden bankruptcy. So that is the moment that the divine teacher seizes his disciple in a sudden bankruptcy. And he has to lift him up out of this lower life into a higher consciousness, out of ignorant attachment to action into that which transcends, yet originates and orders action, out of ego into self, out of life in mind, out of life in mind, vitality and body, into that higher nature beyond mind, which is the status of the divine. He has at the same time to give him that for which he asks and for which he is inspired to seek by the guidance within him. A new law of life is very, very important. He, 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 he has at the same time to give Arjuna that for which he asks for, which is what? A higher, a greater, a new law of life. A new law of life and action high above the insufficient rule of the ordinary human existence, with its endless conflicts and oppositions, perplexities and illusory certainties, a higher law by which the soul shall be free from this bondage of works, and yet powerful to act and conquer in the vast liberty of its divine being. So he has not only um, to lift him out of this lower life into a higher consciousness, but then also out of the ego into the self, out of the life and mind and vitality into the higher nature beyond mind, into the status of divine. He has also to give him, for which he is inspired to seek by the guidance with him, a new law of life and action, high above the insufficient rule of the ordinary human existence with its endless conflicts. And this a higher law by which the soul shall be free from this bondage of works, and yet powerful to act and conquer in the vast liberty of its divine being. For the action must be performed, the world must fulfill its cycles, and the soul of the human being must not turn back in ignorance from the work it is here to do. This is very important. So the action must be performed, and the world must fulfill its cycles, and the soul of the human being, all of our souls, must not turn back in ignorance from the work it is here to do. The whole course of the teaching of the Gita is determined and directed, even in its widest wheelings, towards the fulfillment of these three objects. What are the three objects? The world must fulfill its cycles, and the soul of human being must not turn back in ignorance, but must be there to do the work it has come here to do. We end here. Any questions? Yes, Shivani, you're smiling. Any comments? You want to say something? Oh, yeah, please go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, so basically, this paragraph is the most challenging paragraph. It took me 3, 4 hours to really get the sense of this. What
Yeah.
I perceived as the three goals also are, firstly, he explains dharma, which is the
Yes.
right action, which is selfless
Yes.
action, detachment. Secondly, he also, like Arjun says, that I am a man of action. Why are you driving me towards knowledge? So, what is Krishna driving him is towards self-knowledge.
Hmm.
The knowledge of that, don't be in the ego self, but follow the true self. Because until Arjun doesn't recognize that, so this knowledge is not the theoretical knowledge, but really the
Hmm.
knowledge of the self. And third, I feel like the very important part about what Krishna says about be in the consciousness of the divine. So he's through Gita teaching him the union with the divine, and thus the concept of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga. So these
Yes.
three goals, these are the three fulfillments which Krishna is attempting to accomplish through the transmission of Gita, which I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was stuck at this paragraph and it took me 3, 4 hours to all
That's
combinations.
very well put.
I found these three goals.
Hmm. You all heard it? Yes. Hmm. Very well put and very well formulated. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I think one is simple that when he says that I will then feel it, rather than me here, or I'll just stop and I'll not doing it. So very often we do that to ourselves. That I'm not getting nothing there. I'm not feeling well. Then we simply give excuse for non-action.
For non-action.
Yeah. Not really stating it.
That's a good point. How we actually, that actually happens in our own life when we are meant to take and say something or do something, we often recoil from that action, saying, no, no, let it, it doesn't matter, let it happen. Even in small instances, that effort.
It's not like again, again. It feels important.
Yes, yes,
You must be able to do it.
you must be able to. But do it in a different way. No attachment to the results. Good. So we'll end. Yes. Was this better that I read out, or would you prefer summaries?
Very good.
This is very good.
Okay.
Thank
Mhm.
you.